Laura Burns, Head of Terrorism Research for George Washington University's Program on Extremism. With me today to continue discussing the evolution of the Hamas terrorist organization is Senior Research Fellow Jennifer Baker.
Hi, everyone. We wanted to remind all of our viewers of two very important things. Critical to begin this chronological document with episode 1 in order to gain a full understanding of the complex evolution of Hamas. Further, we highly recommend viewing this video version as evidence, photographs, and demonstratives are used to support the factual nature of this series.
Yes, that is a very good point. And Jen and I are shooting a double header today, so we hope to have episode 12 out shortly after this episode 11. But let's get going on with episode 11.
All right. So, Laura, when we last spoke, the U.S. government had just designated the HLF as a Hamas front and closed them down and seized all of their assets.
Yes, that was quite an event.
And when we mentioned that at that time, none of the HLF leaders were arrested, and the other front organizations like the IAP, UASR, and CARE were still operating.
Yes, we did. We talked about that. At the time, Ahmed Yousef continued to run the United Association for Studies and Research, the UASR. Nahad Awad and Omar Ahmad continued to run CARE. And local chapters of CARE had emerged in a number of places to include the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
So when we said that one of the founders of the CARE DFW chapter, he was Ghassan Al-Lashi. He was the leader of the HLF and also in Infocom, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Who was running the IAP at the time?
Well, by that time, they were operating out of the Chicago area. And one of the primary leaders was a man that we've spoken about before in this series. His name is Rafiq Jabbar. He was on the board of directors. And then according to the year 2000, one of their annual convention flyers, other leaders included Kifah Mustafa, who also led the HLF Chicago office when they were designated as a front for terror. Other individuals leading the IAP were Hassan Sabri, Ahmad Sarsour, and others.
The name Sarsour sounds familiar.
Yes, he and his brothers were the topic of some congressional testimony in 2002. According to that testimony and also some press reports around that time period, Jamil Sarsour, who was based here in the United States, was arrested in Israel in October of 1998 for his involvement with Hamas. And he allegedly confessed that his brothers, Salah Sarsour and Ahmad Sarsour, were involved in raising money for Hamas from the United States, even at that time.
And they lived here in the U.S.?
Yes, they did. I believe it was Milwaukee. And regarding Jamil Sarsour, on January 22nd of 2003, the United States Attorney in the Eastern District of Wisconsin announced a grand jury indictment against Jamil Sarsour, who they labeled as a Milwaukee businessman with evading the currency transaction reporting requirements of the Internal Revenue Service. And they said or alleged that Sarsour had structured $25,000 in financial transactions in October of 1998, the day he departed for Israel. And it goes on to note that he was arrested in Tel Aviv when traveling from Milwaukee, and that Israeli court documents had shown that he was charged with aiding Hamas and later pled guilty to those charges. He was ultimately deported by Israel back to the United States. And court records reveal that later in 2003, he pled guilty, but it's unclear as to which charges specifically he pled guilty to.
Were the other IAP leaders of interest at the time?
Yes, there was another man named Osama Abu Arshad. He ran the IAP newspaper Al Zaytonia, and according to some flyers that we've seen, he served on the preparation committee for the 3rd annual IAP convention alongside Kifah Mustafa that we just talked about, who ran the HLF Chicago office, and alongside Ahmad Sarsour and Rafiq Jabbar. Osama Abu Arshad, he was also or had also worked with the United Association for Studies and Research, the UASR, according to the summer-fall issue of the 1999 Washington Report on Middle East Affairs.
So Sam Abu Arshad worked for two of the original Hamas front organizations.
Yes, he did.
So we continue to see the same folks here in different organizations that were part of the original Hamas infrastructure.
That's right. We do.
After the HLF was shut down, were search warrants executed on their records?
Yes, hundreds of boxes of evidence were seized from the HLF offices in New Jersey, in San Diego, Chicago, and Dallas, which is where the headquarters was, Richardson, actually, in the Dallas area.
That is a lot of evidence. So let's start by talking about one document that was seized from the HLF, and that was actually a folder called HLF Fatwa.
Yes, this is a very interesting document, but let's first learn from another expert what a fatwa is.
A fatwa is an Islamic decree. It's a religious decree that a scholar can issue on any given topic. The legitimacy of a fatwa is stronger when the legitimacy of the scholar issuing it is strong.
So what did this fatwa, this official ruling, state?
Well, the topic of this was paying zakat, which is the Islamic tithing. What we've talked about, the percent of people's or of Muslim salary that they need to give to charity according to their religion. This particular fatwa related to paying zakat to entities based in Western countries as opposed to Islamic or Islamist countries. And it was talking about paying zakat to entities that were working, quote, in the path of Allah. The fatwa actually said, quote, we believe that the meaning of in the path of Allah includes supporting Islamic dawah and making the word of Allah high.
Okay, Laura, let me stop you there for clarification. Allah means God, and we've previously discussed dawah before and said that it's proselytizing, but in the context of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, it is spreading a radical version of Islam to recruit others for their cause.
That's right. In this context, it is the spreading of a radicalized Islamist version of the religion. And that's a very good summary. So here it says, this point is strongly supported because it is a general term referring to that in the path of Allah that includes jihad with arms to fight the enemies, which is more important than other things.
So to the sheikh issuing this edict and those supporting it, violence is more important than anything else.
Yes, that is what this religious ruling says. And then it goes on to say in the same term, in the path of Allah, also includes everything that pleases Allah. Therefore, it includes anything that makes Muslims victorious. And then it goes on to state that reestablishing the Islamic State is a tremendous task and a duty on everyone to support every effort that stops the Kufr and its regimes and reestablishes the Islamic State.
So, Laura, here Kufr is a term meaning non-believer?
Yes, exactly. And in this context, it means any non-Islamist, including Western democracies like the U.S., but also Muslim countries not governed by the Islamist way of thought. And the document goes on to say that Muslims are allowed to pay zakat, that's their tithing, to those parties, groups, and Islamic societies in the West because they aspire to restore the Islamic life and erase Kufr regimes.
Erase regimes that are not Islamists.
Yes. And notably, a very senior Muslim Brotherhood leader at the time, Yousef Al Qaradawi, officially supported this fatwa.
Who was Yousef Al Qaradawi?
It's a very good question. Very influential Muslim Brotherhood leader.
Yousef Al Qaradawi has been described as the godfather of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was an extremely influential scholar that really became sort of the spiritual guide of the global Muslim Brotherhood. He was Egyptian by birth, but moved to Qatar in the 60s and really set up the Qatari religious establishment when Qatar wasn't even a nation. Qatar being the center of the Muslim Brotherhood, he really became, they gave him a pulpit, a platform from which he managed to create a global network of influence. So through Al Jazeera, which is, of course, the TV network out of Qatar, through the use of the internet, he created a legitimacy. He was a very popular scholar, and he became the guy who really provided the fatwas, the religious decrees, the scholarship that guided the global network of the Muslim Brotherhood. So from Hamas to different branches of the Brotherhood worldwide, they all looked up to Yousef Al Qaradawi as their spiritual guide.
And this fatwa was in a folder with a letter from HLF leader Mohammed El-Mazain, who also used the name Abu Ibrahim, as we discussed. And it was taken from his office, the HLF office in San Diego.
Qaradawi was one of the scholars that I would say more than anybody else really made the case, by virtue of his legitimacy, of his platform, that Muslims have a duty to carry out jihad and to create an Islamic State and to fight against Israel, and that the war against Israel was a jihad, a religious cause, and that part of that jihad was military, but part of it was providing support in different ways. Not everybody was supposed to fight, but providing financial support, providing media support, they were equally important and a duty for every Muslim. The idea of duty is very, very important. And again, a fatwa issued by somebody like Qaradawi is extremely important, because we're talking about somebody that is looked up by everybody in conservative Muslim circles, not only Muslim Brotherhood, but beyond that, and really had a reach because of his position at Al Jazeera, because of his scholarship, but really led a lot of people in conservative Muslim circles to take that fatwa seriously. So being able to leverage that fatwa for fundraising purposes was something extremely, extremely useful.
Yousef Al Qaradawi was a very prominent figure in a so-called charity coalition. In Arabic, it's HLF Fatwa, in English, Union of Good, beginning in the late 2000s, with which the Holy Land Foundation had association. And this Union of Good also featured a number of Western European organizations, including Interpal, Al-Aqsa Foundation, the Comité de Beneficence et de Secours aux Palestiniens, and Sanibel Association for Relief and Development. Interestingly, documents, as you will see on your screen, seized from the HLF after it was designated as a front organization, contain information on those organizations, their contact information, and sometimes their bank account information, indicating there was a relationship between those organizations.
Qaradawi spearheaded the formation of a transnational entity, sort of an informal platform of all the different pro-Hamas or Hamas fronts entities in the West. So pretty much in every Western country, there is at least one, if not a couple of organizations that follow the same pattern of being basically created as Hamas fronts, raising funds for the organization and funneling it back to the West Bank and Gaza. Qaradawi really created that platform, the Union of Good, and several governments have openly said, including the US government, have openly said that that's a Hamas front. Again, the legitimacy that Qaradawi brought is what allowed that platform to have a global reach.
But then that fundraising stopped when the HLF was shut down.
Well, the HLF was no longer able to fundraise and send money under that title or name. But some leaders of Hamas here in the United States went on to do the same thing at another fundraising organization. They just opened up another organization.
And what was that organization?
So in January of 2002, just over a month after the HLF was shut down, we're talking a month, an entity called Kind Hearts was formed in Ohio, and former HLF leader Mohammed El-Mazain, that we've just been talking about, headed their fundraising department. He was part of that original Hamas infrastructure on the charts that we've seen. The three men who officially incorporated Kind Hearts are not individuals about whom we've spoken, but they began distributing funds to some of the same entities the HLF did in Lebanon and the Palestinian territories. And HLF officer Haytham McGowery, that we've spoken about before, who was at the Philadelphia meeting, facilitated funding in Lebanon.
So are we going to talk more about that organization later?
Yes, yes, we will. But in the meantime, let's go back to the topic of Infocom. In 2002 was an interesting year for Infocom and the Alashi family.
So now the Alashi brothers who owned Infocom, they were the cousins of Musu Abu Murzak's wife, Nadia Alashi. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. And in December of 2002, the Department of Justice announced, quote, senior leader of Hamas and Texas Computer Company indicted for conspiracy to violate the U.S. ban on financial dealings with terrorists. And in that indictment, it was alleged that Marzouk conspired with Infocom and 5 of its employees to hide his financial transactions. In addition to Marzouk and his wife, Nadia Alashi, the 33-count indictment charged Infocom along with its then Vice President Ghassan Alashi, who was also at the time the chairman of the board of the HLF, and 4 of his brothers. The Alashi brothers and Infocom were also charged with conducting illegal exports from the United States and making false statements on their export declarations, conspiracy and money laundering.
I'm assuming they were arrested.
Yes, the Alashi brothers were, but Marzouk and his wife Nadia Alashi, who were included in that indictment, were out of the country and remain fugitives to date.
Did CARE respond?
Yes. An article from Kara News on December 20th, 2002 quoted attorney Khalid Hamida, whom the article said represented CARE, and said, we as Americans hold true to the values of what is to be American, due process and civil liberties. They then accused Attorney General John Ashcroft of abusing his power and branding all Muslims as terrorists. After a hearing, Ghassan Alashi was reported to have played a victim role, stating, we are the victims here.
And I'm sure we'll talk more about that prosecution later.
Yes, yes, we will.
Okay. Laura, let's go back to what Hamas was doing abroad for a bit. Did they continue their terror attacks?
They did. Yes, they did. And U.S. citizens continue to be killed and injured. We're going to hear from Sari Singer, a U.S. citizen, about a harrowing experience she had in June of 2003 at the hands of Hamas.
So my name is Sari Singer, and I'm originally from Lakewood, New Jersey. I guess maybe the best way to talk about it is currently I'm the founder and director of Strength to Strength. It's an international organization that brings victims of terrorism together globally to heal and move forward with peer-to-peer support. These are all civilian victims of terrorism from all different countries, different backgrounds, different religions. And we work with the existing nonprofits that are on the ground working with the families that have been impacted in the various countries. But I think the story really starts off on the morning of 9/11. And on that morning, I worked 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center. I overslept that morning and was in my apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And when I overslept, I had jumped out of bed, ran to turn on the television to see the weather, and I saw the first tower had been hit. And I immediately called my office and they said, don't come down here. We're being evacuated. We don't know what's happened, but the building shook. And I heard people screaming in the background. I think people were really, didn't know what was happening at that point. For me, it definitely impacted me in a very big way. And when I did get back downtown, I couldn't take my normal subway stop, which was Rector Street, which was about a block and a half from the towers, because that had been completely destroyed. And in December 2001, I quit my job and I moved to Israel to volunteer with organizations that were working with victims of terrorism. And this was during the second Intifada. It was definitely a time where there were attacks happening on a regular basis, especially in Jerusalem where I was living. There are attacks happening weekly there. It was June 11th, 2003. I always say that day reminded me a lot of 9/11. It was gorgeous out. The sky was really blue and it was just perfect summer weather. It was after 5 p.m. and it was rush hour. And the traffic was really bad, I remember, and the buses were running late and the bus stop kept getting larger and larger with more people. I called my friend to let her know where I was and that I'd be a few minutes late. And I remember getting on the bus and it was very crowded at this point because more and more people had come and there was the backlash of all the buses running late. And there were no empty seats on the bus. And I rarely sat down on the bus because there were usually older people getting on. So I always was used to standing. But for some reason on this day, I was so tired that I wished that there was an empty seat and there wasn't. So I ended up sitting I stood next to the back door, which if you're familiar with the egged buses, it's really the middle of the bus. And people just kept getting on and sitting down. And I remember us moving to the next bus stop, which was Machane Yehuda, the Jewish marketplace. And as I did that, I saw two women got up from their seats. They were the last two seats in the front section of the bus on the right side. Now, normally getting into the marketplace, I would have sat at the aisle seat because if somebody older would have gotten on with packages, I would have wanted to get up for them. But for some reason, I don't know why, I ended up sitting down I moved in next to the window. And I remember the girl who sat down next to me, and her boyfriend was standing holding the poles in front of our seats. And I knew they were together because they were with each other at the bus stop. I remembered seeing them. And the bus just kept getting more and more crowded. And I remember looking outside for like a split second and just seeing like hundreds of people outside because they were waiting for all different buses. I remember the bus driver having to close the doors because too many people were trying to get on. And I had just gotten off the phone with my friend when we approached Machane Yehuda. So, back then our cell phones didn't look like they look like today. They were big and I didn't want to hold on to my cell phone. And the seats on the buses in Israel are very close together. And I remember I had put my knapsack on the floor in between my legs. And so when we started moving, I bent over slightly. I opened up my knapsack to put my phone into it. And as I went to close it and started to zip it up, I felt this huge shockwave hit me. And the only way to explain the shockwave is it's like two pieces of metal that hit so hard and vibrate back. That's what I remember my body feeling like. And I remember trying to lift my hands up to my face and I couldn't. And they were being pushed down by that shockwave. And I didn't think that this was a terrorist attack. I thought that we had gotten to a bus accident or that somebody hit me in the face with something because I was looking down at the time. But the last thing that I thought was that somebody boarded that bus strapped with explosives to hurt and murder innocent people. And when the blast stopped, I couldn't open my left eye at all because it had already been swollen shut from something that they thought hit it from the bus. And I could barely open my right eye to see that the roof of the bus had come in and the man's head in front of me and he wasn't moving. And for a split second after the blast, there's this silence. And it's not the silence in the summertime that you hear when like the crickets are out. It's literally the silence of death all around you. It's a split second, but it feels like so much longer. And after that deafening silence, my ears started ringing really loud and I started screaming. And luckily I was screaming because there was a guy who had been 3 blocks away. He heard the blast and he came running towards the burning bus. He said, "You have to get out of the bus." And I said, "I can't." He said, "Put your feet up on the bar next to you," which I thought had been the window of the bus, but later I saw a picture and it was the bottom of the bus that had blown out from the impact of the blast. And for some reason, I don't know how he was able to, and the doctors explained it to me, him and another gentleman pulled me out from this little triangle that was on the bottom of the bus. And the doctors felt that from my injuries, that my body was in such shock that I was able to just put my hands over my head somehow to be able to be pulled out very quickly, where I was brought to the side of the road where this old woman was waiting with me. She wasn't the police. She wasn't the fire department. She was there as if she was a mother waiting for her child to get help. And she was keeping me awake, asking me questions. I was taken immediately into Hadassah and Kerem Hospital. They told me that it was lucky that I was screaming from the bus because a lot of the impact of the blast happened in the front section because that's where the terrorist was. And so they said that some of the people there, they couldn't tell who was unconscious and who was no longer alive. And by screaming, it let them know that I was there and that they could pull me out. And that was a very important piece. He said that I was considered what was called kal, which is lightly injured, which in Israel standards, that means that you're not missing a limb. But they told me that I would be the last person of the seriously wounded to go into surgery that night. So my injuries were, I had shrapnel that went through my left shoulder, breaking my clavicle bone. Both my eardrums were blown from the impact of the blast. My hair was burned. My face was burned and bruised. My legs were badly cut up from metal, they think from the bus. I have shrapnel in my mouth that's inoperable, and that's lucky because on that day, over 100 of us were injured on and off the bus, and 17 innocent people were murdered. And I found out only a few days later that those included the people that were standing and seated around me. So everyone around me, I was in the last section, the last seat of the front section of the bus to the right next to the window. So the girl next to me and her boyfriend didn't survive. The 2 rows in front of me, they didn't survive. They approximated that the terrorist was 2 people standing away from me, which would have made him next to the boyfriend. And they said it was pretty lucky that I came out with the injuries I did, considering the impact around me and what had happened within that section of the bus. Because I believe that on that day, I was given a second chance. There's no rhyme or reason why I survived and all the people around me didn't. And so every time I speak and every time I share my story, I'm sharing my story for those 17 innocent people that didn't get to go back to home to their family members that day. And they're not here anymore, but I can be their voice and I can share their story and make sure they're never forgotten.
I'm so thankful she could share her experience with us.
Yes, it is so important to hear from survivors, terror victims who have survived these experiences so that they can kind of, explain to us what it's like. Yeah. So as we mentioned, we're doing a doubleheader today. So please join us next time for episode 12, Mike's Place.